Why does the media class in Canada make it so difficult to discern what is true and what is false? And why are university students swallowing these narratives whole without demanding evidence for the claims being put out? I sit down with Jim McMurtry, a teacher who was fired for questioning the mass graves murdered children narrative, to discuss these matters. Here's that conversation. Jim, thank you for joining me and for taking the time to sit down to have this conversation with me. Do you want to start just briefly telling everyone about your background? You were a teacher, you were fired. Do you want to start there?
I'd be happy to do that. Maybe the most interesting thing for people is that I'm the son of a fairly noted, well-known Canadian named Roy McMurtry, who was the Chief Justice of Ontario and involved in the Constitution, CEO of the Canadian Football League, and all sorts of interesting roles. But his particular focus was on rights and freedoms. So here I am as a teacher, and in a, obviously just in a disgraceful exit to my career, was fired for having said something that I think most people today know to be true, that those who were enrolled in it, residential schools, that sadly and tragically died did so from disease and not murder. I haven't taught since. I have ended up building a profile online, written many articles, written 2 books, and so I'm not like your typical teacher, which are generally people who are quite Canadian, quite compliant and agreeable and so forth. I'm feeling it's outrageous that children are being lied to about all sorts of things, as you know, about race, about gender, about literature being bad, about Canada being bad, and trying to change our history, these daily land acknowledgements. But most significantly for me, they're presenting they're presenting Canada as a genocidal state, as they did on October 22nd, 2022, because of residential schools. And I study them. I have a PhD from the University of Toronto. I'm somebody who has an authority. So I think that I'm the last person that should have been walked out of a classroom and for having discussed Indian residential schools. And I only did it because my principal asked all teachers to do that the day of this pantomime, of this mass hysteria in Canada of what happened in Kamloops. And that's where I am right now. I'm in Kamloops with Francis Whittleson and 1BC leader Dallas Brody. And we're trying to convince students at Thompsons Rivers University, because their administration is still telling them that there's 215 dead children in a mass grave nearby.
So it was your studies that made you question the narrative that the media was putting out, the allegations of the murdered children and the mass graves. It was your studies that informed you that that's not the case?
Absolutely. My thesis supervisor in graduate school was Dr. Robert Carney, the father of Mark Carney. Now, Mark has said publicly on one occasion that he doesn't agree with his father's views, which I think is, I mentioned my father because I would never, I'm loyalty first to family, but also to what my father said as a Chief Justice, that you got to get at the truth. And I don't think any parent or student expects teachers to lie to them. And that's been happening, telling kids they're born in the wrong body, that if they're this skin color or that religion, they're going to have very different experience in Canada. And now people are saying that people don't have title to their land, to their house. I'm wondering what rights are going to be left. I think it's a really awful thing. It's reminiscent of Charles Manson, that horrible serial killer in California in the 60s. What Manson was trying to do, his plan was called Helter Skelter. It's like reconciliation. He was trying to create a race war. And I think you saw from the footage that went viral about my presence on campus, along with obviously the 2 women that I mentioned.
I'll show that shortly.
It just shows you this is the opposite of reconciliation. This is creating tremendous acrimony and ultimately, I think, a very serious race clash in Canada. If you're going to take one small race and give them rights that nobody else has, and have the rest of us like medieval serfs or vassals having to pay them to do anything, every time we want to, put a new porch in our backyard because it's technically somebody else's territory, we have to have someone do an archaeological dig. I think it's very worrisome, and it starts in the schools for me, that you don't
Yeah.
have any compelled speech. You don't tell kids every single day that they don't live on that they live on stolen land. I think this is really destructive to not only them, but to our country.
They're also swallowing a lie. Jim, I want to ask you, how closely were you following this whole narrative in the media when it was all unfolding from when it first came out? Because I recall a case where they also found some anomalies by a church or something like that, and they actually did digging. I believe this was in Winnipeg. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know how closely
Yeah,
people are following,
Pine
if my
Creek.
memory
Yeah,
serves me
yeah.
right. And what did they find when they did an actual dig at that particular site when they detected some anomalies? It was rocks. It was rocks. There was no bodies. There was no sign of crime. There was no sign of murders. There was not a single trace of remain. It was rocks. How do you think the narrative got swallowed whole by students who believed that there are, in fact, remains and the number is 215? But the only thing that we have to go on to determine that is the fact that it's been uh, searched by a ground penetrating radar, and all that has been found is anomalies. How do we get from anomalies to murdered children?
Well, you know what? They never said they found anomalies. So I was the first person to go public about this, and I was the first person punished in Canada. And that was, again, almost 5 years ago, or 4.5 years ago. And what they said, and I'm going to repeat it, that they said that they found the remains of 215 children, some as young as 3, in a mass grave. And the band there, the First Nation, has repeated on many occasions that it was a mass grave and their children there. Now, because there was no police investigation, coroner examination, no excavation, no digging, nobody's looking into it. It's simply because the police and everybody else knows there are no bodies there. Because there are only 2 deaths ever at the school. I can tell you who their names are: Adrian George and Pearl Joe. And the girl died sadly drowning in a river, which is why they built a swimming pool so it wouldn't happen to other kids. They learned how to swim. And then the boy died just playing with other kids, accidentally hanged himself. Those are the only 2 deaths. There are another approximately 48 kids, probably 47, that died while enrolled, but they died in hospital or in a sanitarium for tuberculosis or back at home. So there were only 2 deaths at the school, and there were inquests. There was no teacher involved in anything, and never any burials. So all of a sudden, someone comes along, a woman, a woke cultural anthropologist who spent her whole young adult life learning this garbage about how there's this horrible white European race that's doing devilish things to everybody else, and she had heard about a ghost story, and there are many ghost stories coming out of this particular school. One of them is that Queen Elizabeth came in 1964 with her husband Prince Philip, and they kidnapped 10 of the children. You can find this online.
So Jim and I were having a little bit of technical difficulties there with the Wi-Fi signal. We've found a new location where it's much stronger and the audio and video is much better quality. Thank you to actually Francis Widowson to accommodate us. Thank you, Francis. So Jim, I don't really remember where we left off, but I was thinking of jumping to the video that went quite viral, where you're talking with a student and he just does not want to hear it. He seems quite irate. And yeah, why don't we just jump to that video now, and then I can get your reaction about it.
They were just in Philly.
Why can't you just listen to what I have to
stop
say?
yelling.
I'm
listening. Go for it.
But they haven't found any evidence of any murdered child in any residential school. That's
Bullshit.
But where's the evidence then?
Why do you need what do you do? Why do you need that?
Accuse people of murder without having evidence. That's an awful thing to do. What you're doing
it's an awful thing they did to the population of Canadians.
These teachers.
Fucking taking kids away from their families, putting them in a school is bad enough.
But the schools,
that's fucking enough, and they need to be punished for
that. The school's right.
I know your obsession with bodies is fucking beyond me,
That's
man.
my job.
Good. Fuck you don't deserve a job.
All right, that video from Juno News / True North there, a very angry young man. There's a lot to unpack there. The very first thing that stood out to me is when you said, "Where is the evidence?" And he said, "Why do you need evidence?" Jim, why do you think these students, these young minds that are in these colleges and universities, are so quick to swallow the narrative without demanding the proof for the claims that the media is putting out, especially when someone like yourself says there is no evidence? Can you point to a single person that's been murdered? Can you point to a single shred of physical evidence to prove something nefarious happened? Why do you think they are reacting so drastically and erratically to this conversation?
I think we live in an age of conformity and compliance. And that's a dangerous thing because, democracy is always fragile. And we need people who think and examine things critically and demand evidence. So we're not seeing that at a university. It's a really awful indictment, I think, of a post-secondary institution that has trained students to drown us out, trained students not to consider a different view, trained students not to be concerned with evidence. The last thing my father said to me about my case before he passed was, "You've got to get at the truth." I think that's absolutely essential. I think society won't, society that we know here in Canada will not survive this. Now, of course, it's been a pantomime. It's been a theater of the absurd from the beginning. You have Trudeau on one knee with a teddy bear, and where he was on was a well-known cemetery, and then we're not necessarily children there. Most of them were probably not Indigenous at all, but they were Catholic. So it's just, the whole thing has been an exercise in manipulation. Trudeau is the guy that literally physically went in on a horse as a savior when he spoke to the Chilcotin and other groups. So this is, I think, again, sadly, a government and a media that perhaps, with under some understanding, feel some guilt or just a sense of Christian compassion for the less successful members of our society. The Indigenous are in particular, struggle in some ways and have had a rough history. The transformation to modern society was very quick. And
So you think it's compassion that's causing this, sense of compassion that's causing these students to just say, no, I blanketly believe what the media says. The media said it. It must be true. Why do you need evidence? The other thing that kind of stood out to me in that video was when the young man said, "Why are you so obsessed with bodies?" It reminded me of when people were starting to question the trans agenda, and their only response when presented with inconvenient facts and biological facts about the whole thing, their reaction was very similar. Like, well, why are you so obsessed with children? Why are you so obsessed with this? Why are you so obsessed if a man decides to be a trans woman? It seems a common thread among
But I would
these
say
people.
what I'm doing right now as a teacher, I'm throwing a bone, literally and figuratively, to the other side to say there's got to be a bone because this is what they need in Kamloops to sustain their narrative. But I don't really believe anything good comes from these manipulators and deceivers on the other side. So as a teacher, what I've noticed in recent years, particularly during peak woke, which is the year I got fired in 2021, that we had all the race stuff, particularly George Floyd the year before, as you know, the trans stuff, the prying into little children's sexual identities, asking them, demanding that they all come up with pronouns for themselves, showing them graphic images of fellatio and cunnilingus and anal sex. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The censorship of literature, the debasement of history, the in some ways that just saying that they want to reject everything about Western society, about Enlightenment values. They want to lower standards academically and behavior. I could talk, and then of course the compelled daily land acknowledgements. So every single child is thinking that he or she is on stolen land and will one day not have anything. And of course, the reality of where I live in Tsawwassen, in Delta and British Columbia, There's a band, the Tsawwassen there, who are looking to take over all of Tsawwassen. And just north of me is Richmond, where five different groups are seeking to have a senior title to all the property there. So it's a very frightening thing. So I agree with you. My point is this. I have to see some good in the people that were screaming at me, and one person tried to tackle me, and so many others were just deaf to anything that I said. But how did they get to there? I can't blame young people. I refuse to do that, because that's just a cardinal virtue for any teacher. You give kids a chance, like the legal system. You don't put kid in jail for no jail at all under the age of 12. So let's assume here that they're still young and they've just been misdirected. So I blame not the students, because many of them, they've never read a book on Canadian history. Many of them have recently arrived in Canada. I blame
So you're laying this blame squarely on the professors.
Absolutely. But I think the professors are just like elephants in a parade. They're getting this wicked woke religion thrust upon them by institutional leaders. And as you know, so I'm not just talking about government and media. I'm talking about every school district, every university. A lot of my family is in the legal profession. They all have to go through these re-education courses and believe in things, including that their 215 child remains on the grounds of the former residential school there. So it's really all of society is participating in a mass delusion. And the reason people do that is because if you go along, you get along. It's very difficult. As you know, in Salem, Massachusetts, it wasn't a good idea to be an unmarried woman or someone who lived outside of Christian mores. It wouldn't be a good idea in Russia today to say something positive about the Ukrainians.
So to go along to get along, I want to talk about that for a second. Sure. What would you say to people who are watching all of this unfold? It's come to a really crazy boiling point with all of this. Students are, I watch them beret like farm animals.
This is insane. Oh, thank you. Keep going. Please, keep going.
At that protest, at that college campus, when yourself and Francis, Dallas Brody, the leader of One BC, was there, trying to have conversations, and these people were literally braying like goats. So that's crazy. What would you say to people who are watching this and they want to say something, they want to speak out, but they are afraid? They're afraid of being fired from a job. They're afraid of backlash online. They're afraid of what their friends think. What would be your advice to someone who wants to dispel the narrative, but
see, this isn't new. This is everywhere. If you live in the Muslim part of the world where I visited, and you decide one day to tell your parents that you no longer want to be Muslim, or you decide in India you don't want to be Hindu or Sikh or something anymore, physical harm could be visited upon you very quickly. The reality is, in fact, the fastest growing religion in the world today, Islam, means submission, right? And Muslim means someone who submits. So the idea of having forces in a society that try and control everybody for their own self-interest, I know that's totalitarian, but it's present everywhere. There are always going to be groups that are going to lie to people and take advantage of people, whether it's a company, whether it's the military, whatever. So what I want young people to do is to think for themselves. It's rather basic. The word education comes from Greek roots, words like educere and educare, meaning to lead out and to develop. I don't understand how I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. We challenged everything our government told us, everything our teachers and our parents told us. And not because we wanted to have a revolution, although those were revolutionary years. You remember from the Beatles album, Revolution and so forth. And that relates back to what I said about Charles Manson. Charles Manson, who was inspired by the Beatles and who was a pathological killer, psychopath, what he wanted to do was create a race war. That he called it helter skelter, and he felt that there was an opportunity for someone like him to emerge if everybody else was distracted by this race war. I think what people that are viewing this need to understand, that this is only going to lead to violence. If you tell people like you do what the communists did in Russia, and you know about that, where you take the more successful people in the society and take away their land, and you give it to people who are less successful, in many cases criminal or unproductive, you're not going to make a better society. You're going to make a worse society. The people in Richmond, they're places in Canada already in a war footing. You have people in Haida Gwaii, which is given away to one small race there. People with private properties who work their whole lives to acquire something. Most Canadians have their assets tied up in their houses, and all of a sudden learning that no longer there's any value in it. And in Richmond, that's the thing. People went to the bank the next day concerned about their property prices going down, and the bank said, sorry, we're not going to even renew your mortgage.
So to boil all that down, you would say just to, fervently question the narrative, fervently ask questions of your government, of your professors. Is that what you're saying for
absolutely?
is that your advice for young people?
Yeah, there's a good textbook. We used to actually have courses of academic merit in the arts and languages and so forth. Now it's all social justice. It's all telling kids how bad white people are and how everything needs to be all scholarships, all law, medicine needs to be, even recently, be full of people who don't look like me and you. And even recently, the federal government announced plans there are too many white farmers in Canada, so we need to change that. So my point is, as a teacher in a classroom, what you should be concerned about is every child. Every child has a right to learn, and you shouldn't teach to their ancestry. You shouldn't be concerned about anything other than that these are kids that have a right to learn. And so for me, one of the slogans that I will use, and it's a beautiful quote by Lord Acton, is that power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And we know that there's parts of human nature. And so you have to be very careful with any authority, and you need to question authority. So what they're saying with this narrative, whether it was COVID or whether it was the truckers convoy, and there's all sorts of things, whether it's all these terrible white police officers killing innocent black criminals, whatever narrative is out there, people need to think. They need to see for themselves how easily manipulated it will be. And it says for British Columbia teachers, standard number 1, that you're not allowed to exploit children for political advantage. And yet that's all they're doing in schools. The schools have become brainwashing centers. And we talked about these various things. How can schools get away with doing, to me, the cardinal sin of all, which is telling little boys and girls they're in the wrong body and they should consider becoming sterilized and mutilated and so forth. And parents and others in our society have allowed that happen for a number of years. That I was involved long before the Indigenous stuff and getting rid of dry cleans coming into kindergarten classes, and these kids bounce on their knees for these drag queens sexual gratification. That was happening. That was how drag queens were coming in where I was teaching. Used to teach in Surrey right up until the spring of 2023. And then I went around and I spread it out on X and told all sorts of parents, and there are no more drag queens having little kids bouncing on their knees or laps or higher up. And
so your recommendation for nonsense to stop is to speak up wherever you can. Don't be afraid. Say it on X, say it on social media, share with friends and family. Do you have, since young people can't really trust the media, no one can trust the media. They've come out with this 215 narrative. They said it, they all parroted it, and if you questioned it, they called you all kinds of names. What media sources do you consume? What do you follow to sort of consume counter narratives, for lack of a better word? Where do you get your truth from?
You're steering the conversation right where I had hoped to take it. So in 1984, Orwell talks about hope lies in the proles, that the 15% of the society that controls everybody, who's part of the party, like the Communist Party. But in 1984, they called them just the party of Big Brother. And if you look at the school system, it's about 15% that have the better salaries, have the power, have the easy jobs and so forth, whether it's department heads and principals and superintendents and all these other people who work in these bureaucracies. And they have so much more rights over everybody else. And it's hard to get at that. So Orwell prophesied that the change would come through the proles. Hope lies in the proles. So I'm telling you where the hope lies in my estimation. And that it lies in people like you. Because we can't trust that 15% of the society who is taking advantage of everybody else. We need to have independent voices. I can't watch CBC. I can't watch CTV, I can't read the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and so forth. And what the annoying thing about that, a lot of people can't understand that all these organs, all these institutions are lying to us. But they'll say to me in schools, well, I didn't know, Jim, that you just talked to a parent who said that 4 of her daughter's friends were transitioning to boys. In one class, 4 girls transitioning. And they say, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to go talk to the principal. I'm going to go talk to the superintendent. I'm going to write my MLA or my MP. And I'm going, you're writing to the very people who don't want to change things. You're writing to the party, you're writing to the 15% who are very happy. Do you think people like Justin Trudeau are unhappy with this nightmarish, nihilistic, dystopian, woke cult? Of course not. He's profiting from it. So the hope lies in people like you, Kat, who've gone out there with an independent voice and who's concerned about evidence and concerned about the values that used to guide us as a society here in the West. And you are speaking freely and truthfully. And so I would say that the future doesn't lie with the pros. The future lies with social media, with young people like you who question the narrative and have the guts, because really in the end, it's not the insight. Because I know there's tons of teachers who think just like me. You get them quietly somewhere and they go, Jim, I agree with everything you're saying. I just can't open my mouth. I want to get promoted. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want others to think negatively of me. I'm not that type. I don't want to be put in a situation where others are looking. I need to wear an orange shirt, Jim, or a black shirt or a green shirt or a blue shirt or whatever. I mean, I need to fit in. I need to march. I need to put babies in the ovens in Auschwitz because I might lose my job. And my point, this is the danger of people.
Where it leads, exactly. That's exactly where it leads. I noticed that when there's a meme going around during the lockdowns when it said, if you're wondering which side you'd land on during late 30s, early 40s Germany, if you resisted the government, you'd be one of the good guys, and otherwise you'd be going along to get along. And thank you for that encouragement to use social media. Speaking of that, I recall Mark Carney saying something like American companies and just basically maligning social media and saying, well, X is an American company owned by Elon Musk and he's bad because, he's been saying some awfully conservative sounding things. Are you concerned about this government being so bloated and tyrannical that at some point they will come for social media? Because they have made allusions to saying, well, X is dangerous. There's so much bigotry. There's so much hatred on there.
Kat, they're going to come for you. You're the enemy too, right? You've managed right now not to be in a position where you're enough of a threat. You just wait. You got so many followers. Wait till it goes even higher. And so the fact is I got over 1 million hits yesterday for standing with 2 really highly esteemed Canadians in Dallas Brody, an MLA in British Columbia, leading a new party there, and Professor Francis Whittleson. And one of the things that we were trying to communicate to people is that they're being lied to about 215 children being buried there, murdered by their teachers. And the interesting thing is the person that was doing the lying, the administration at TRU, as recently as last year, wrote to all the students, staff, the whole community saying, there are these bodies, there are the 215. And then all the schools in Kamloops, they go to the local band, to the Kamloops Reserve, and they do a powwow. And part of what they do there is they remember the 215. So the idea of Canada being
so they go and have a ceremony or an event to remember people that haven't even been confirmed to have been found? Or
there's never were any missing children. And so this is what I said earlier. I can tell you the kids that died while they're in enrollment, but they died in sanatoria or hospitals or back in the home reserve.
Yeah, you did mention that.
And so this is what's extraordinary about here. It is a deception of tremendous immensity. But this is history. I lived in Switzerland for a number of years. The story of William Tell isn't real. It never happened. There's no evidence of it. And my ancestry is British. And there never was a Robin Hood with the characteristics.
It seems like our elites are very interested in pushing narratives that aren't very real. So it's probably good point to end on there.
Can
And
I say one last thing just pursuant to
yeah,
it?
absolutely. I was about to say, so
we've got all these kids here who at TRU and they don't really know much about Canadian history or much of anything, and they're struggling just to for post-secondary education. And you turn to them and you say to them, do you know the people who are spreading the lies about the 215 and Kamloops nearby? Do you know there are people who are making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year? So the reality is they do not want you. They do not want the truth. They don't want the status quo of the orthodoxy to change. This works for them.
The lie is profitable.
Like, this is the counter. This is the Reformation. You know, the Reformation was trying to reform the Christian church.
Yeah, the lie is profitable to these people. How much money have been
They didn't want to reform it. The church didn't want to reform itself. Why would people high up in ecclesiastic orders, why would they want to, and nobles want to reform, British parliamentary system and actually have a voice for peasants? Of course, the people in power, the people with a voice, the people who are profiting with the higher salaries and the easier lives, they don't want this to change. So this is what people have to do. If the hope lies in social media, but it also lies in those students, the students that were yelling at me and looking at me like I was some sort of monster. The hope lies with them. And I think, it's going to take time to undo this very sophisticated psyop that eventually is going to completely turn around. And young people are going to look at people like Dallas Brody and Francis Whittleson and say, thank goodness for them. And they're going to say that about you too, Kat.
Jim, thank you so much for your time and for the conversation. Do you want to tell people where they can find you and find your work? And if there's any books that you have, do you want to point people to your website?
Yeah, people go to jimmcmurtry.com. They can find where I have many publications and recently wrote a book on my case and relates to the Kamloops 215. But most prominently, I'm active on X. And I think one thing people admire about me is that nothing's going to stop me. People have threatened me. That people have, of course, taken away my livelihood, and people have done all sorts of things. And the one thing that I think people understand right now, that there are actually brave, independent voices in Canada. And I think I'm one of them. And
you're an example.
People can find me on X, and I think it's turning. I think what's going to happen right now is that all of a sudden, all these people who are our enemies are going to turn around and say, "Oh no, I was with Francis, I was with Dallas, I was with Jim and Kat from the beginning."
That's the hope. Jim, thank you so much for your time.
A great pleasure. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you for watching this video. Please consider supporting by subscribing to the channel, hitting that like button, and leaving a comment. If you're watching on X, hit the follow button if you aren't already, and consider supporting by subscribing on here. It's only like $2 a month. You get a super cool badge, and you get priority interactions in comments and DMs, as well as mediocre bonus content. See you next time.